And, you know, when you look back at the Bernie campaign, obviously it's still fresh for you. You got two schools of thought right now in the progressive movement. One is he should have been he should have gone scorched earth. Look what Trump did in 2016. He called them puppets, he called them names, and people responded to that. He didn't take the gloves off with clear opportunities. And I've spoken with people that worked for your campaign, high level people. There's some people who think that, and then there's some people who think, well, it didn't really help us to be attacking the Democratic establishment because a lot of voters might be with us on the policy but think they're being attacked. Bottom line, I think, based on people I've spoken with, Bernie, he might have never said this, but is deathly afraid of being like Ralph Nader. And if he were to go that scorched earth, then being blamed for Trump's reelection. What was your thoughts just in the trenches? Do you think if he would have been more aggressive? I mean, people use the term contrast. It could have made a difference, or do you think going against the establishment and sticking with that, framing hurt him among older voters?
I am reluctant to Monday morning quarterback Bernie Sanders because in part it is his choice not to go negative previously in his career. The first negative ad he's ever run was in the course of this campaign, and it was milquetoast, and only in response to a Joe Biden lie about his Social Security record. It's because he has always punched above the belt that he, I believe, is considered to be the most trusted person in Congress, that he has such high confidence in an institution that itself has received lower confidence ratings from the public in recent years, and is the most liked politicians in America, and is someone who can be so strong with independents and Democrats and even Republicans alike. So I want to credit that. I want to credit the political instincts that enabled him to get this far. At the same time, I think that the worst thing you can do is kind of sit in the middle and be making critiques of the establishment that can be weaponized in bad faith by a media who knows perfectly well who we're talking about, but who will insist, for instance, that when Bernie Sanders calls out the establishment, he's calling out Black voters, right? So you can do what he began to do, but you can't go halfway, and the second you start to get pushed back, retreat. If we were going to make a critique of the establishment, we needed to be ready to define who the establishment were and make it clear that they were, in fact, the enemy. The establishment was never voters. It was members of an institution that are corrupt because of who funds their campaigns, who funds their presence in Congress, and how they are able to earn their money and maintain their wealth and status and privilege, right? So we needed to be specific about that. The fact that Joe Biden's one of his chief advisors is a former healthcare lobbyist is something that should be on the lips of every American as far as I am concerned. The idea that the establishment is Black voters should in and of itself have been called out as racist in an attempt to use Black voters as a human shield to guard themselves from substantive critique in the same way that Joe Biden is doing right now. I remember there was a whole cycle in 2016 where Bernie Sanders called Planned Parenthood establishment, and it was a bunch of hand wringing about that. You can't lob those kinds of charges without being willing to substantiate them, and I think you have to be really careful about who you pick as a target. And there were many surrogates on the staff, including myself and Nina Turner, who I think were well poised to make those arguments. And I don't think we were always deployed in the most effective way to do the pushback that's necessary when the media is as antagonistic to the campaign and its efforts as it was. Now, it might be the case that even doing a better job of bolstering one's argument isn't enough, and that ultimately some kind of scorched earth was required. And I think a lot of people would have liked to have seen, if the writing's on the wall, if it looks like the campaign's going down anyway, if Super Tuesday didn't go as we planned and a pandemic was taking over the country and everything was relegated to online digital efforts anyway, what would it have looked like if Bernie kind of left everything on the field, as it were? And I think that it's not wrong for us to fantasize about that, especially since Bernie had so much financial support. He had so many people who were willing to go to the mat with him. And there's a feeling that he is, an older politician. And what is the point of preserving your what are you preserving your legacy for? Is a legacy more important than the possibility of a moonshot. And I personally have an enormous amount of respect for Ralph Nader. And if I were to be remembered as Ralph Nader, I would be very pleased with my political legacy and my personal legacy on this earth. So I don't know if there's any truth to that. I don't know what kind of pressures Senator Sanders was under, frankly. And for that reason, I don't want to second guess too much. He is still a sitting senator. He still has a lot on his plate and is doing a lot of really important work for Americans. And I don't think that any of us should diminish his contribution to left politics and his continued contribution in the middle of this global crisis. But I do think it's worth us all on the left considering strategically both what a scorched earth strategy looks like, what it means to be able to commit to that, what kind of fundraising that requires, whether or not independent expenditures, PAC money is required to support that kind of effort. I don't know the answer to those questions, but I think it really is worth having that conversation because this opportunity is going to roll around again, and what would be the most tragic thing is for us to make the same mistake.
I'd like to ask you, and sorry if this is kind of in the weeds, but I think there's a communications angle because you were the press secretary. And to me, as somebody who, travels and covers the campaign in independent media, I thought that Trump very, very smartly went against the media in 2016. Obviously, yeah. I wouldn't extend that to, having your supporters chant at them and, that darkness. But honestly, there is disdain for the media, even on the blue side. And I think Bernie tended to, I remember in 2016, when I was at the Young Turks, it was a battle just to get him on there. And, some people working for the staff were very fixated on getting like the LA Times endorsement, but didn't really understand digital. That seemed to rectify itself in 2020, but still would always go on these programs, would always kind of buy into the gaslighting. I remember in one instance, I really think he should have just dismissed the Bernie bro thing as nonsense, not even acknowledged it, because that really voters get programmed. And if Bernie is even giving it, dignifying it with credulity, it takes out a life on its own. Do you think for the progressive movement to succeed, not just nationally, but there needs to be a little bit more, not fascism, not violence, but taking on the media and pointing out when they're being dishonest?
Yeah. Our campaign was the first to put out a plan to support and protect the media in the ways that we believe are meaningful and which Trump has no respect for. Showing respect for the Fourth Estate. Look, the people who were called out as some of the worst bad actors with respect to the relationship with the media, people like myself and David Sirota, are in fact from journalism. And I don't want to put myself on the same level as Sirota, who has had obviously a 20-year career, and I'm fairly new in this, but who has an enormous respect for how it should operate and the role it should play. And their critique is of a corrupted corporate media that is not reflecting the stories that are of interest to the public, the stories that would even help their bottom line, because there's absolutely an appetite for progressivism, et cetera. There is a complete kind of ignorance and historical myopia about how the right have really understood how media works, and how the Powell memo in the 1970s stated that part of the long-term strategy of the Republican Party was to have a kind of marriage between the corporate media and a right-wing agenda. Why are we, he asked, why are we allowing advertisers to come on and use advertisements that are counterintuitive to the interests of the people who own the station, the corporate interests of the people who own the station? We should be streamlining this process, right? And they executed, and they have been successful in doing so. And there needs to be a lot more consciousness on the broader left, among liberals and leftists alike, about how to take that power back. But more specifically to your question, it was at times frustrating because the campaign had an ability to speak to so many people with our own digital efforts, right? Even without using Young Turks or friendly left media, we had more viewers on our Twitch streams and people tuning in to our videos on social media. Bernie Sanders had more Instagram followers, probably also Instagram, but Twitter followers than anybody else in the race. I think everybody combined didn't even have as many followers or interactions as Bernie Sanders did. And yet, he only came on the podcast twice. We ended up not really having a regular Twitch show. I saw today that Donald Trump, his campaign has put out a show meant to counter the positions of the women on The View called The Right View. And it's a show of kind of reasonably good production value in which Katrina Pearson and one of the wives of the Trump sons and two other women sit around and they advance the agenda, right, in a format that is digestible. And I'm sure a lot of women of a certain demographic find appealing, right? And the question becomes, are you, given the imbalance, the media imbalance that exists, are you fully using the tools at your disposal? Are you using the fact that your campaign is the most adept at weaponizing, if you will, digital? Are you using that to your advantage? You know, could the campaign, for instance, have announced new policy on its own channels in a way that forces reporters who wanted to cover those policies to tune in and then get a dose of whatever else Bernie wanted to say on his own terms? Could there have been regular fireside chats a long time before the coronavirus forced all communications to come in that format? And could they have been produced in a way that would have forced the hand of the media who was sometimes reluctant to cover Bernie Sanders? Could we have exploited the relationships that we had with so many popular figures, with Cardi B and Public Enemy and Emily Ratajkowski and whomever else, so that there was sincere pop culture interest in what was going on in the campaign without having to rely on the mainstream corporate media infrastructure to host us? I think the answer to all of those questions is yes. And again, I don't say that because I'm interested in Monday morning quarterbacking or, you know, cascading a campaign, which I know is dealing with a lot of problems on a lot of different fronts. But the reality is I don't know that it fully appreciated what it had and what it could do in the way that I think Trump fully understands, that he can command his own audience. You can criticize the media, but at the end of the day, it has its own flaws and biases. And I think it's your job as a comms professional to try to figure out how to exploit those in your own interest. And I'm not sure the campaign always took the step beyond simply criticizing the media to doing what Trump does and exploiting its own weaknesses for his own purposes.
And lastly, Jacobin has had their what next for the left current affairs. There's all these autopsies and views for how the left actually wins. I'd like to get from your perspective, because right now there's a bit of a fissure. I mean, I'm seeing it on my channel. You got a lot of people saying Bernie's a sellout. Then you got people saying, Bernie worked hard, but now we got to, carry the baton. What does the left do now? Because on one end, people feel deflated from what happened. But on the other end, unfortunately, with this coronavirus, it's creating a massive opportunity as well. I mean, there's a lot of people hurting, and it's not just progressives. I mean, there's people that voted for Biden losing their jobs. There's conservatives losing their jobs. There's a lot of people post-ideology starting to see the major holes that the Bernie campaign was talking about for years. What do you think is the opportunity now for the progressive movement, not just to win elections, but to start winning some of these policy goals with such suffering right now?
I think it is our moral obligation, our political obligation, our obligation as Americans, if you want to make it a patriotic issue, to continue to hold Joe Biden's feet to the fire and be very clear about the fact that he is not yet the Democratic nominee, and that there is no reason why anyone should be shamed out of substantively criticizing him and making credible threats to withhold one's vote absent some pretty reasonable concessions on his part. Because I think we should be very clear about this. The concessions that we're demanding are not some crazy left-wing litmus test that would ultimately undermine his efforts in the fall. Quite to the contrary, by adopting popular progressive positions that are overwhelmingly supported by not just Democrats, but the independents that you need to win, he is bolstering his chances against Donald Trump in the fall. And anybody saying that you're just voting for Trump or, what have for asking him to be a better candidate is wrong, and you should ignore them, frankly. It is your obligation to continue to draw contrast and to highlight the hypocrisy of saying, oh, yes, we should pay for testing and treatment for coronavirus victims, but not for people who are suffering and cannot pay for cancer treatment or diabetes or any of these other things. Something, by the way, which I tweeted a couple of weeks back or a month now or so back, and it caused me to go viral, right? It caused me to trend because people, I think, are on the verge of really comprehending that cognitive dissonance, or not being able to kind of manage that cognitive dissonance anymore, and being forced to recognize that the scripts that they've been fed by the Democratic Party, that we just can't do better. This is all there is. A better world isn't possible. Asking for more is pie in the sky or cookies and milk or akin to demanding a pony is wrongheaded, right? And by opening the door, the coronavirus has caused Democrats to open the door and make some concessions on that ground. And I think it's important for us to continue to push into that door all the way open. And even if all we get is Joe Biden acknowledging that having healthcare as a human right requires there not to be cost at the point of care, right? Right now, he keeps saying, I believe in healthcare as a human right, but nobody is asking him what that means if under his plan, 10 million people, 10 million Americans are going to continue to be uninsured, right? It's incumbent on us to keep driving those points home. And if he then secures a nomination and doesn't concede and fails, it's incumbent on us to make it clear that his failure is his own. He failed to beat Trump because he ignored the recommendations of the left. He ignored the recommendations of not just the left, but the center, people who overwhelmingly support all of these programs like free public college and Medicare for all. So for now, I think that needs to be the focus. And we need to be really united in the fact that it's not, I'm going to pick up and take my ball and go home mentality. It's we are voters. We are the ones, all of us, who are the backbone of the Democratic Party. We are all of us, the firewall that Joe Biden is dependent on to defeat Trump. And the lesser of two evils argument has enabled a slippery slope that has made it so that we have two parties that are both to the right of where the average American is. And if we don't stand up and ask for it to slip back a little bit in the right direction, we know that we're going to be asked to shovel the same excrement 4 years from now. And we're tired of it. We're 4 years past the first time that we all stood in line and dutifully pulled the lever for Hillary Clinton. More Hillary Clinton voters in 2008 chose not to vote for Barack Obama than Bernie Sanders voters defected and didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. And so we did what was required of us before. We've gotten nothing but grief and castigation ever since then, maligned as Bernie bros who don't have the interests of the party at heart. And now you're going to have to try something different. You're going to have to try to do the political work of earning our vote. And I look forward to seeing what that looks like.
And I also think it's important. I wish Bernie would have pointed this out. Maybe you and others told him to. When Joe Biden entered politics, he was a major warrior for public financing of campaigns and getting money out of politics and all these things. I mean, nobody brought it. I tweeted it the other day, since corruption is now normalized, no media picked it up. Literally, they kicked the reporter off the most recent virtual fundraiser as soon as he was opening up questions to Wall Street donors. A major press access issue that you would kick a reporter off the call when your Wall Street donors have questions for you. So I think that it's not enough to say, well, the RNC and Trump have $200 billion, so we're going to raise money from every special interest and dark corner of America. He needs to be challenged on that, because if that's what he's going to do, I don't think there's any hopes for a President Biden really making a dent in terms of Citizens United or any of these things. So thank you very much, Briahna Joy Gray. I enjoy it when you're trending, and I appreciate you fighting the good fight. We look forward to seeing your work soon.
Thank you, Jordan. Always a pleasure.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com, where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.